Hey everyone, I'm not usually one to share personal stuff online, but after the whirlwind I've been through recently, I feel like I need some clarity. Or maybe I just need to vent. Either way, here I am, putting it all out there. I'm Mike, 34 years old, living in New York City. Up until a few weeks ago, I honestly thought I had my life figured out. I'm married to Laura, who's 31 and works on Wall Street. She's ambitious, sharp, and has that rare ability to turn heads as soon as she walks into a room. We met 6 years ago at a party hosted by a mutual friend. Back then, I was climbing the ladder at a mid tier advertising firm, while she was fresh out of business school, ready to take the financial world by storm. Laura had this magnetism about her. She could win anyone over with her charm, and when she turned her attention to me that night, I couldn't believe it. Don't get me wrong, I take care of myself, and I know I'm decent looking, but she was the kind of woman you'd see in a magazine, and she knew it. Her confidence was intoxicating. We hit it off instantly, and within 6 months, I had moved into her apartment in Midtown. 2 years later, we got married in a gorgeous fall ceremony upstate. It was picture perfect. I really thought we made the perfect team. Different in many ways, but we balanced each other out. She was the driven, ambitious one, while I was more grounded, the type to enjoy a quiet night at home with takeout and a movie. Looking back now, I see the red flags. There were things that didn't sit right, moments I brushed aside because I was either too in love or too blind to notice. I'll get into all the details soon, but for now, just know this: things started out great. To everyone on the outside, we looked like a power couple. No kids, her choice, and what seemed like the perfect life. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. So, as I mentioned, we appeared to be a solid couple to everyone around us. We lived in a beautiful apartment on the Upper East Side, not massive, but with an amazing view and plenty of space for the two of us. Laura earned significantly more than I did, or used to. More on that later. She's a senior analyst at a big Wall Street firm, comfortably making six figures. A couple of years ago, I left my job in advertising to start my own small marketing consultancy. It's not flashy, but it pays the bills and gives me the flexibility I've always wanted. Our daily life wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but it worked. Laura thrived in her career. She loved the rush of closing deals, the late nights with high profile clients, and the prestige of being one of the youngest women to climb the ranks in her firm. I was genuinely proud of her for that. I understood how much it meant to her to be taken seriously in a male dominated industry, and I supported her every step of the way. I've always been the one to keep things steady. I took on most of the household responsibilities: groceries, cleaning, laundry. Because her schedule was so intense, I didn't mind. I enjoyed being the one who made her life a little easier. She'd often joke that I was the perfect husband, and while I'd laugh it off, it felt good to hear. Our weekends were spent brunching with friends or trying out new restaurants. Laura's a foodie and a wine enthusiast, always on the hunt for the next Michelin starred spot. I'm more of a burgers and beer guy, but I didn't mind tagging along. Seeing her excitement when she talked about something she loved made it worth it. Sex? It was fine, I guess. It was never the highlight of our relationship, but I figured it was normal for things to slow down after a few years together. She was often too tired or too stressed, which I attributed to her demanding job. I didn't push, and she didn't seem too concerned, so I assumed it was just a phase. In hindsight, that phase was more than just exhaustion, it was a cover. Looking back now, I see how Laura had a way of controlling the story. She exuded confidence and certainty, so I never questioned her. If she said she was working late, I believed her. If she needed a solo weekend in the Hamptons to reset, I thought she deserved it. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. I believed we were on the same team, but I was wrong. The way I found out, it still makes my stomach turn. I'll get to that part, but first, let me explain how her working late routine became a normal thing. That's when the cracks in our relationship started to show. Laura's job has always been demanding. It's Wall Street, after all. But over the past year, things escalated. She'd been working toward a promotion to VP, and she made it clear that this was her top priority. That meant more late nights, weekends at the office, and endless client dinners that often stretched into the early hours of the morning. At first, I was fully supportive. Who wouldn't want their spouse to succeed? I admired her ambition and wanted her to achieve everything she'd been striving for. I'd make her coffee in the mornings, pack her lunch when she was too rushed to grab something, and even leave little notes in her bag to remind her that I loved her. Cheesy? Maybe. But I thought those small gestures mattered. The late nights started slowly. Once a week, then twice, and before long, it was almost every night. This deal could make my career, she'd tell me, or you don't understand how important this meeting is. She'd come home completely drained, sometimes not until 2 or 3 a.m., toss her bag by the door, and collapse onto the couch. I'd try to talk to her about her day, but she'd wave me off with a tired, "I'm too exhausted, babe. Can we talk tomorrow?" And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Wall Street is brutal, and she was one of the few women in her firm breaking through the glass ceiling. I respected her drive and wanted to give her the space she needed to succeed. But it reached a point where I'd go to bed alone almost every night. She'd sneak in hours later, and by the time I woke up, she was already out the door, heading to another day packed with meetings, calls, and high stakes negotiations. It was lonely. But I didn't hold it against her. I told myself it was just temporary, that when she got the promotion, things would return to normal. Looking back, I can't believe how oblivious I was. There were signs, little things that didn't quite make sense, but I brushed them aside. She started getting defensive when I asked about her coworkers, offering vague responses and changing the subject. Her phone became a permanent fixture in her hand, and at some point she began locking it. "It's just work stuff," she'd say if I asked. She even started taking calls in the bathroom, claiming it was quieter in there. It felt strange, but I figured it was just the stress of her job. After all, she was my wife. I trusted her completely. That trust was like a fortress, and I couldn't imagine anything breaking it. But the cracks were already forming, even if I couldn't see them at the time. As the late nights and frantic work pace continued, I leaned even harder into being the supportive husband. I didn't want to add to her stress. If I knew she'd be working late, I'd swing by her favorite cafe to grab her go-to coffee. On Fridays, when I could see how drained she was, I'd order sushi from her favorite spot and set up a little date night at home. Candles, wine, the works. She usually gave me a distracted smile and said, "Thanks, babe, you're the best," before diving back into her laptop. I told myself not to take it personally. She was locked in on her career, and I admired that about her. Plenty of people settle once they reach a certain level of success, but not Laura. She always wanted more. And didn't she deserve it? When she started talking about how close she was to the VP promotion, I felt genuinely excited for her. It seemed like all her sacrifices, and mine, were about to pay off. She had been working so hard for years, and I was proud to stand by her side. I thought, "Once I get this promotion, everything will be easier," she said one night over dinner. "I'll have more control over my schedule, and we can finally take that trip to Italy you've been talking about." It was the first time in months she'd mentioned something just for us, and it gave me hope. I held on to the promise of a future where we weren't living like two ships passing in the night. Around this time, she also started dressing differently for work. Sleek, tailored designer outfits and more makeup than usual. When I teased her about dressing to impress, she laughed and said, "You have to look the part if you want to be taken seriously in this world." That made sense to me. She was in a cutthroat industry, and I wanted her to succeed. Her confidence during this time was through the roof. She'd strut out the door every morning like she owned the world, and I couldn't have been prouder. I didn't notice the subtle shift in her demeanor then, how her confidence had morphed into something almost smug, as though she was keeping a secret. But I didn't think anything of it. I chalked it up to her drive and determination to prove herself. I was proud of her, even when she started spending entire weekends working. She'd leave early Saturday mornings and not come back until after dark. "Prepping for a big presentation," she'd say when I asked. I never pressed her for more details. Why would I? I was her biggest supporter, and I trusted her completely. Then one day I got an anonymous message. Just a few lines, but it stopped me cold. That was the moment my perfect world began to fall apart. It started like any other week. Laura was in full grind mode, leaving early, coming home late, and working through the weekend. I was focused on my own stuff, managing client projects, hanging out with friends, and keeping the apartment from falling apart. On the surface, life felt normal. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It read, "Your wife isn't working late. Check her stories, and you'll see the truth. You deserve to know." I froze, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that it had to be spam or some kind of prank. Who sends a message like that out of nowhere? I decided to ignore it, dismissing it as nonsense. But no matter how hard I tried, the words lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. That night, Laura came home late again. She dropped her bag on the floor, kicked off her heels, and poured herself a glass of wine. "What a day," she said, collapsing onto the couch like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Another late one, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Yeah, the client was a nightmare," she replied, scrolling through her phone without even looking at me. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But something felt off. That text had planted a seed of doubt, and now I couldn't shake it. Who would send it and why? The next day, the uneasiness stayed with me. I couldn't stop replaying all the late nights, the vague explanations, and the moments when she seemed so distracted. Was there something going on, or was I being paranoid? I didn't say anything to her. I didn't want to come off as the insecure husband who accuses his wife of cheating because of an anonymous text. And truthfully, I didn't want to believe it. Laura was busy, sure, but cheating, that wasn't her. At least that's what I kept telling myself. When she said she had to stay late again that night, I nodded and watched her leave. I didn't press her, didn't ask questions, but deep down, the doubt was growing. Something didn't feel right. The foundation of trust I'd built over years was starting to crack. I didn't know it then, but that text was only the beginning. The storm was coming, and I had no idea how big it would be. I tried to shrug off the text, told myself it had to be a joke, a mistake, or someone trolling me. Laura had never given me a reason to doubt her. Sure, she was ambitious and driven, but unfaithful? No, that wasn't her. It couldn't be. Still, the doubt lingered. Over the next few days, I found myself watching her more closely. When she said she had to work late again, I casually asked, "Big client or just the usual grind?" She flashed me a distracted smile. "Big client. Super demanding. They've got me on my toes 24/7. I wanted to believe her, but there was something in her tone. Too smooth, almost rehearsed. Like she was delivering lines she'd practiced. I shook the thought away. Why would she lie? I told myself I was overthinking it. A couple nights later, another message came. From the same unknown number. "You're still ignoring it. She's playing you. I'll prove it." My stomach dropped. Whoever this was wasn't letting it go. If it was a joke, it wasn't funny, and if it wasn't, well, I wasn't ready to face that possibility. I hesitated, then replied, "Who is this? What do you want?" The response came almost immediately. "Someone who knows what's going on. I'm giving you a heads up. She's been seeing someone else for months." I froze, staring at the screen as my chest tightened. Months? No way. That couldn't be true. I thought about all the late nights, the weekends she spent at the office. The way she always seemed so busy, could there be any truth to it? No, Laura would never do that to me. I typed back quickly, "I don't believe you. Stop messing with me." This time, the reply took longer. When it finally came, it was blunt and unnerving. "Suit yourself. You'll see soon enough." Frustrated and shaken, I threw my phone onto the couch. I refused to let some anonymous number get into my head. Laura was working tirelessly to secure that promotion, and whoever this was clearly didn't know what they were talking about. I wasn't going to let them poison my thoughts. That night, Laura came home late again. I tried to act normal. I asked her about her day, listened to her talk about market volatility and client demands, and nodded along like everything was fine. I wanted it to be fine. But something had shifted. No matter how much I told myself it was nonsense, that seed of doubt had taken root. It was there in the background, quietly growing, making me question things I didn't want to question. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I trusted Laura. She was my wife, my partner. She wouldn't lie to me. Would she? Seriously? A couple of days later, I was at my desk, catching up on emails, when my phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. I sighed, already annoyed, not wanting to deal with this again. But as I opened it, my irritation turned into ice-cold dread. Attached to the message were two photos. The first showed Laura, clear as day, sitting at an outdoor cafe with a guy I didn't recognize. They were closer than you'd sit with a coworker. The second photo hit me like a freight train. It was of them kissing. Not a friendly peck, but a full-on, hand on the back of the head, passionate kiss. The message read, "She's not working late. This is what she's really doing." And besides that second photo, I stared at the photos, my hands trembling. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was an old picture, maybe this guy was just a friend, and I was misreading the situation. But no. The timestamp in the corner was from the night before. While I was home making dinner and waiting for her to come back, this was where she was. With him. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My chest tightened and my stomach twisted in knots. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This wasn't some anonymous message I could ignore. This was proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Before I could even begin to process what I was feeling, another message came through. This time it was a video. My finger hovered over the play button as I hesitated, unsure if I could handle seeing more. But I couldn't stop myself. It hit play. The video was short, maybe 15 seconds, but it was enough. It showed Laura and the same guy walking into a hotel together. She was laughing, her arm looped through his, looking relaxed and carefree in a way I hadn't seen in months. The timestamp matched the photos. She wasn't even trying to hide it. My world shattered. Everything I thought I knew about Laura, but our marriage was a lie. I couldn't stop replaying the video in my head. The way she smiled at him, the way she looked so happy, happier than she'd looked with me in a long time. I sat there for what felt like hours just staring at my phone. Waves of anger, sadness, and humiliation washed over me. I'd been so blind, so trusting. How could I not have seen this coming? How could I have been so naive? That night, when Laura came home, she acted like nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was, and headed straight to the shower. I couldn't even look at her. My mind was spinning, but I stayed quiet. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I decided I needed to figure out exactly how far this went and what I was going to do about it. That night, after Laura went to bed, I stayed up. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the images came flooding back. The photos, the video, the way she smiled at him, the way she used to smile at me. I sat on the couch in the dark, replaying everything in my mind. Every late night, every excuse, every locked phone. It all started to fall into place, and the weight of it was crushing. She was lying to me. Not just once or twice, but for months. She had created an entire separate life, and I was the fool who believed her every word. I wanted to storm into the bedroom, wake her up, and demand answers. I wanted to scream at her, force her to admit the truth. But I held back. Not yet. I needed to be smart. The next morning, I played my part. I kissed her goodbye as she left for work, told her to have a good day, and even reminded her to grab her lunch. She smiled at me, smiled, like she wasn't tearing my life apart behind my back. That smile made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. After she left, I got to work. I needed answers. I combed through our shared computer, her social media accounts, and old text messages. But Laura was too careful. There was nothing suspicious in the places I could access, which only confirmed what I already knew. She was hiding something. Around midday, another message came from the unknown number. This time it was worse. So much worse. Attached were more photos and videos. One showed them at a bar, laughing, touching each other in a way that made my stomach turn. Another was in what I assumed was his room, a dimly lit space where they were half-dressed, tangled together on a couch. And then there was the video. It was short, grainy, like it had been taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking what it showed. They were in bed, having sex. My hands were trembling as I watched it, and I felt like I might throw up. Suspecting something was one thing, imagining it was bad enough, but seeing it, that was a different kind of pain. It was like a knife twisting in my chest over and over again. I couldn't stop watching it, even though it made me sick. I studied every detail, her face, her movements, the way she looked at him. I wanted it burned into my memory. I needed to remember this betrayal, to feel every ounce of the hurt. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I bottled it up, letting the anger simmer just below the surface. I knew I had to be methodical. Confronting her without a plan would give her a way out. Tears, excuses, maybe even denial. No, I needed her to feel what I was feeling. She needed to lose something too. I wasn't just angry. I was determined. If she wanted to play games, I'd show her just how far I could go. Once the initial shock wore off, anger took over. It became my fuel. I wasn't going to let Laura get away with this. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, and lied to my face for months. And for what? Some guy who wasn't even smart enough to avoid getting caught on camera? If she could lie so easily, I could play her game too. But I wasn't about to confront her. Not yet. First, I was going to hit her where it would hurt the most. Her career. For Laura, her job wasn't just a job. It was her identity. She lived for the prestige, the power, the money, and the respect she commanded in the high-stakes world of Wall Street. She was always bragging about being one of the youngest senior analysts at her firm and how close she was to landing the VP position. She thought she was invincible. But I knew better. I started by compiling everything I had on her affair. The photos, the videos, the texts. I organized them into a tidy little folder labeled for HR. Her firm had a strict code of conduct, particularly when it came to relationships that could pose a conflict of interest. If I could prove she was involved with someone tied to her clients or her work, her career could come crashing down. It didn't take long to figure out who the guy was. After some light social media sleuthing, I discovered he was a hedge fund manager, one of her firm's clients. Jackpot. Not only was she cheating, but she was doing it with someone directly tied to her work. This wasn't just an affair, it was a glaring violation of her HR department. I spent days crafting an anonymous email to her HR department. I included all the evidence, photos, videos, timestamps, and laid out a detailed explanation of how her actions violated the firm's policies. I made sure the tone sounded professional and concerned, framing it as a tip from someone in the industry who valued integrity. Using a throwaway email account, I sent the message and then sat back to wait. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. About a week after I sent the email, Laura came home looking pale and visibly shaken. She barely spoke during dinner, and when I asked how her day was, she mumbled something vague about stress at work. I knew exactly what had happened, but I kept up the act of the clueless, supportive husband. The next morning, I noticed she was on the phone for hours, pacing the apartment and whispering frantically. I caught snippets of her conversation, words like allegations, HR investigation, and compliance breach. It was working. Her perfect little world was starting to crumble, and she had no idea I was the one behind it. By the end of the week, she was a wreck. She wasn't eating, barely sleeping, and spent most of her time locked in the bedroom with her laptop. Late one night, she finally broke down and confessed what was going on. "Someone reported me to HR," she said, her voice trembling. "They're accusing me of misconduct with a client." I widened my eyes, playing the part perfectly. "What? That's insane. Who would do that?" "I don't know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "But they have photos and other stuff. I don't even know how they got it." I wanted to laugh out loud. The same confidence, arrogance, and smugness she'd carried for months were gone, replaced by panic and fear. She was unraveling. And it was everything I'd hoped for. Over the next few days, I watched as her life continued to fall apart. Her firm put her on administrative leave while they conducted their investigation. She couldn't stop obsessing over who had reported her. "It has to be someone who knows me," she said one night, pacing back and forth in the living room. "Someone who has it out for me." I just nodded, hiding my satisfaction. Watching her spiral was oddly satisfying in a way I couldn't even explain. She had thought she was untouchable, that she could lie and cheat without facing any consequences. But now, she was learning the hard way that her actions had a price. While she was consumed with trying to salvage her career, I was already planning my next move. She had destroyed my trust and shattered our marriage, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. I was going to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else the way she had hurt me. A few days after her firm officially put her on leave, Laura finally hit her breaking point. She came home from a meeting with HR, looking completely drained. Gone was the composed, polished woman I'd known. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She dropped her bag by the door without a word and collapsed onto the couch, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. Reese quickly told her what had happened, and that she needed to talk to her friend about something and save the story. Mike, I don't know what to do, she said eventually, her voice trembling. This could ruin me. If they fire me, I'll never get another job on Wall Street. My entire career, everything I've worked for, it's all on the line. I feigned sympathy, sitting down beside her and rubbing her back gently. That's awful, Laura. Did they tell you who reported you? She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. No, they said it was an anonymous tip, but it had photos, videos, stuff I didn't even know existed. Her voice broke and the tears spilled over. How could someone do this to me, who hates me this much? Her breakdown might have moved me months ago. It might have even broken my heart. But now? I felt nothing. Detached. Cold. She'd done this to herself. And deep down, I knew she knew it too. Over the next few days, her paranoia only grew. She questioned everyone, coworkers, friends, even me. Do you think it could have been someone at the firm? She asked one night, her voice tight with desperation. Maybe someone jealous of me? Maybe, I said, keeping my tone neutral, or it could be someone you upset without even realizing it. She paused, giving me a sharp look. You don't think, it couldn't have been you, right? My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression calm. Me? Why would I do that? I didn't even know this was happening until you told me. She hesitated, searching my face, then shook her head. You're right. That's crazy. You've always supported me. It was almost laughable how easily she dismissed the idea. Even with everything collapsing around her, she still underestimated me. That weekend, she packed a bag and told me she was going to stay with her parents in Connecticut for a while. I just need to get away, she said, her voice brittle. I can't handle being in the city right now. I nodded, my tone even. Of course. Take all the time you need. As soon as she left, the apartment felt like a different place. Quiet. Peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I could think clearly. I poured myself a drink and sank into the couch, reflecting on everything that had happened. Laura was unraveling. Her career was in jeopardy. Her confidence shattered. And she had no idea I was the one behind it all. I had taken back control, hit her where it hurt the most. But instead of triumph, all I felt was impendingness. Laura stayed at her parents' house in Connecticut for about a week. While she was gone, the apartment became a sanctuary. I didn't have to deal with her frantic pacing, whispered phone calls, or paranoid ramblings. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But as the days passed, a different emotion crept in. Guilt. Not for exposing her or orchestrating her downfall. She deserved that. But for the way I'd done it. The lies, the secrecy, the satisfaction I felt watching her crumble. I had become someone I didn't recognize. And yet, there was a part of me that wanted her to know. I wanted her to see me, to understand what she'd done to me, and to hear it from my own mouth. When she texted, saying she wanted to come back to the city to work on us, I saw my opportunity. I told her I'd pick her up from the train station. When I arrived, she looked worn down. No designer outfit, no confident stride. She wore sweats, her eyes tired, and her shoulders slumped. She climbed into the car silently, and I didn't push her. The real conversation would happen later. Back at the apartment, she dropped her bag by the door and looked around like the place was unfamiliar. It feels weird being here, she said softly. I shrugged. It's your home. You shouldn't feel weird. She gave me a small, sad smile and sank onto the couch. I've been thinking a lot, she began, folding her hands in her lap, about us, about everything. And I want to apologize, Mike, for neglecting you, for putting work above our marriage. I know I haven't been the wife you deserve. I stared at her, searching her face. Was this genuine or just another performance? Is that really what you think went wrong? I asked, my tone calm but pointed. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I stood up and began pacing. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. Laura, I know. I know about the late nights, the client meetings, the hotel rooms. I know everything. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? The last time I saw you, you gave me this blood work. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of evidence. The photos, the videos, the messages. I held it out to her. This, I said coldly. I know, Laura. I've known for weeks. She froze, her hands trembling as she took the phone. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the images, her breathing ragged. How? How did you get these? She whispered. I didn't get them, I said, my voice sharp. I sent them. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and horror. What? I sent them to your HR department, I said, each word deliberate. I was the one who reported you. I was the one who exposed your affair. Her hands dropped to her lap and she stared at me, utterly stunned. Mike, why would you? Why? I cut her off, my voice rising. Why? Because you lied to me, Laura. For months, you lied to me. You made me look like an idiot while you were out screwing some hedge fund guy. I gave you everything. My trust, my support, and you threw it all away. Tears streamed down her face as she stammered, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, but this is cruel. You've ruined my career, my whole life. Good, I said coldly. Now you know what it feels like to lose something you care about. She stood up, her body trembling. For a moment, I thought she might yell or lash out, but instead she crumpled back onto the couch. I can't believe you did this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're not the man I thought you were. I laughed bitterly. Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you. The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just empty. After what felt like hours, she stood up and wiped her face. I'm going to stay with my parents, she said, her voice hollow. I'll send someone to pick up my things. Fine, I said, not looking at her. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned back one last time. You didn't have to destroy me, Mike. You could have just left. I met her gaze, unflinching. You destroyed us first. And then she was gone, leaving the door ajar behind her. That was the last time I saw Laura. She didn't come back for her things. She sent a moving company to handle it. I filed for divorce the following week, and the process was quick and cold, just like the end of our marriage. Looking back, I don't regret what I did. She needed to face the consequences of her actions. But I've realized that revenge doesn't heal anything. It doesn't fix the broken pieces or fill the emptiness. And what I've learned is to just leave you standing in the rubble, wondering if the destruction was worth it. Now, I'm trying to move forward. Slowly, one day at a time. Maybe one day I'll feel whole again. But for now, I'm just trying to figure out who I am without her and without the bitterness that nearly consumed me. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and check out our cheating stories. Bye-bye.